Hey, good evening, everybody. My name is Dr. Nathan Thompson with Exemplify Health Center, an affiliate of the Wellness Way right here in Yorkville, Illinois. I hope you guys had a great Monday, and I'm just finishing up in the office, going a little bit earlier today. For all you mothers out there, happy belated Mother Day. I hope it was a special day for you. And next month, what is it, Father's Day. So happy early Father's Day to all the fathers that are watching. But I think it's mostly women that are watching. Hey, if you're joining me right now, make sure you say hello. Make sure you let me know where you're watching from too. I love seeing people from all across the United States, different countries, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. So make sure you let me know where you're watching from. I always get a joy and get a kick out of seeing where everyone is from. And I know I've even met some of you down in Orlando. So thank you guys very much, as always, for watching. We always try to come up with great content for you guys to help you on your journey to health. I think today is really going to be something that is awesome, or at least I hope it is, because we're going to talk about cancer from a different perspective. So who does this involve? This involves a lot of people. When you look at the number of people who die from cancer, I believe that number, and I might be misquoting myself, but I think it's 1 in 3 people actually pass away from cancer. So this is going to affect you, or I know for a fact it's going to affect someone that you love. So let's talk about this and look at cancer from a different perspective. And this is going to be part 1, only because to do everything that I want to go over is probably going to take about 3 parts. And hopefully by the end of it, after you watch all those, it'll help you give a different perspective, especially from the Wellness Way, on how even we view cancer. So real quick, guys, while we're waiting for people to join us, guys, you can watch additional content that we put out at Dr. Nathan Thompson. You can go on TikTok. In fact, if you go on TikTok, I do a lot of just quick hits. Last week's TikTok video has garnered almost 1.3 million views. And it was on the gallbladder, and it is really amazing how many people are really suffering with liver and gallbladder issues, and it's just absolutely amazing. So you can follow us on TikTok. Guys, you can always go back and rewatch. We upload these videos in addition to some other videos on YouTube at Dr. Nathan Thompson. And occasionally we also get deleted off of YouTube, and I know that I'm just like 1 strike away from getting banned off of YouTube. So if you don't see me on there, you always will see me on Rumble. And of course, I'm also on Truth Social. For those of you who have Apple, you'll be able to find me at Dr. Nathan Thompson on Truth Social. So guys, as well, we've had so many people who have reached out who have said, Dr. Nate, I need your help. Guys, as far as doing remote consults, really the only people that we're seeing are here in the Chicagoland area. We are just full because I only have a limited schedule as far as remote consults are concerned. But have no fear, because if you go to thewellnessway.com, you can click that button right up there, and it says consult with a doctor, and the Wellness Way will find you a doctor either close to you in the area or a doctor that's available to do a consult with you. So these doctors think the same way that I do. We practice the same way, and so rest assured you're going to get a doctor who knows what they're doing, especially if they're a Wellness Way doctor or a practitioner, okay? Also, make sure, guys, that you're watching A Different Perspective with Dr. Patrick Flynn every Saturday morning at 8 o'clock. Go to this website because Facebook censors it very heavily. So if you go to thewellnessway.com, you'll be able to watch A Different Perspective. And Dr. Patrick actually, over the last couple of weeks, is talking about breast cancer as well, and I'll touch on that a little bit, especially further down the road. We talk about hormone-based cancers especially. So let's get into it, guys. Looking at cancer differently, part 1. I know probably I'll get a little bit of blowback, from people, and which is expected because this is definitely an emotional topic. But just remember, cancer was actually spiking, and it's leveled off a little bit. And guys, one of the reasons why it's leveled off so much, one of the reasons why is because we don't smoke as much as we used to. And the other reason is because we stopped recommending hormones to women like Premarin after menopause. And so it was, when I go over part 2 and part 3, we'll talk about, kind of why that is. But the biggest changes that you've seen in cancer not getting worse has nothing to do with the treatment as much as it is not doing stupid things that's causing cellular damage. And I'll explain to you why it was causing some kind of cellular damage in your body. So if cancer still is, I believe, the second leading cause of death in the United States, only second to heart disease. It's a close second. Then, guys, if we see so many people who are having cancer, you should have no problems with looking at something from a different perspective. Because remember this, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and somehow expecting a different result. My other favorite quote is when you say that you can't solve your problems with the current level of thinking that actually created the problem. And there's a lot of cancers that are actually created in the United States, and I'm actually going to be showing you why, okay? So guys, when you look at cancer treatment today, and the first thing that I want to say is, Dr. Nate, have you ever recommended chemotherapy for people? Absolutely, okay? The only thing that I can do is I can recommend, I can give you my opinion, but have I recommended chemotherapy in certain types of cancers? And yes, absolutely, I have. There's actually some markers that I'll go over on part 2 that will actually show really where you're sitting at and how to properly assess maybe what your options should actually be. But the thing today is when you look at cancer treatment or you look at the treatment of cancer, all healthcare is talking about is early detection, early detection, early detection, or hey, this kind of treatment, this kind of chemotherapy is going to kill it the best. But there's nothing that's being said about here is an expanded list of things that you can do that's not going to create any damage to the DNA. And here's things that you can do to make sure that you're not knocking down your immune system, because ultimately cancer comes down to a failure of a person's immune system. I'm actually going to show you, looking at a textbook of medical physiology, on really where the failure occurs in which someone can have cancer develop and then have cancer progress. So all we're talking about today is let's find it early, and then if we do, let's try to figure out the best way in order to kill it off. Guys, even before you get the best medical test like a mammogram or a colonoscopy or something that they're telling people to do all the time, remember, they're actually using diagnostic equipment to look for a tumor that is already there, which doesn't make a lot of sense, because I talked to someone about this today. I said, would you want to know if the tumor was this big? And they said, yes, I would want to know. Well, would you want to know if it was this big? And they said, yes, I would want to know. Well, would you want to know if it was just the size of a period at the end of a sentence? They said, yes, I would want to know. And I say, great, because even some of that best technology can't pick it up until you reach a certain level of cancer. So then I asked her this question. All right, well then, would you want to know if you are building the physiology that will lead towards a particular kind of cancer? And she said, yes, I would want to know. And I said, well then, in that case, then you shouldn't be getting colonoscopies and mammogram and waiting to do something until you already have cancer that's already there. So what makes more sense is to actually be testing for physiology that could actually lead to it and fix the physiology that leads to the progression of cancer. So this right here, yes, I've recommended chemotherapy and whatnot, but what we're doing is we're having a discussion about how to treat something best, when I'm saying, why aren't we having a discussion about how to even find it earlier and how to actually be testing for the physiology that we can sit down and say, physiologically, you're headed towards having a very, very bad day. So we're going to take it a step further and talk about cancer from a different perspective. So just remember, if things aren't working out very well, then you have to start looking at it from a different angle. And that's how we grow, that's how we evolve, and ultimately that's how we start serving people a whole heck of a lot better. But the reason why I wanted to talk about this, guys, was I came across an article just about 5 or 6 days ago, and basically what they said was this: adolescent and young adult AYA cancer survivors are at a higher risk for death due to secondary primary cancer. So they had a specific cancer, they underwent chemotherapy, radiation, whatever they did, and then what would happen is they were just left alone and saying, well, just go ahead and test it, every year, test every few years. Oh, you're in the clear because this cancer hasn't come back. But the reality is that they're actually finding that these kids, these young adults, these adolescents who had initially a primary cancer underwent treatment for it, is that if they developed a second primary cancer, they were actually at an 84% increased risk for death due to this new primary cancer compared to the general population of people who had another primary cancer. So what they're finding is that these young adults having cancer the second time, their outcomes were actually much worse, which makes you beg the question, what did the treatment do the first time that could make their outcome much worse the second time? And one of the things that they said in this article is said, we're doing a horrible job actually talking to the young adult, to the adolescent, and to their parents about what to do to actually prevent the cancer from coming back. And I agree with them 100%. And I'm going to give you kind of an example, okay? So think of this, okay? Think of you have a garbage dump and you keep going out and you keep throwing the garbage out, but no one empties the garbage. If you leave that there in the summertime in the Chicagoland area with the humidity at 98% and the temperature at 90 degrees, it's not going to take very long before this becomes an absolute disaster. So I want you to think about it. The garbage soon is going to attract rats. And if you just go and you say, you know what, here is our solution for this rat problem that we have around this garbage dump, we're just going to go ahead and throw out rat poison. Now, if you throw out rat poison, you will kill the rats. Some of them will actually survive. So you look out and you see the rats are dead. Let's clean up the dead rats. But if you leave the dirty garbage dump, the very thing that caused the rats to want to go there, then all that's going to happen is you're going to have a new rat problem. It's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when. Now here, this is the sticker, is some of those rats that survive the rat poison are going to come back and they're going to be resistant to the rat poison because now they've developed a level of resistance to it. So guys, when it comes to chemotherapy, when it comes to the traditional treatment of cancer, you know, the problem is we're saying, oh, we killed the cancer, but then what I say is what did we do to change the physiology that brought the cancer on? Because if you never change the physiology, merely removing a tumor, decreasing a tumor burden, or doing chemotherapy isn't doing anything to change the physiology that brought it on in the first place. So really all that's doing is actually buying you some time. Now, the side effects of chemotherapy, one of the biggest ones, is that it will wreck the immune system. Because remember, chemotherapy is a poison, and it will poison the cells with the highest metabolism, which is why you lose the hair, which is also why you'll destroy the bone marrow, because those cells have a high metabolic rate and they're very, very sensitive to any kind of toxin or any kind of poison. So let me ask you guys a question when it comes to healthcare, guys. And if you are finding this fascinating, which I hope you are, please make sure that you share this video. So my question is this. Who's talking about, number one, how to truly prevent cancer? And I'm talking about a lot more than just saying, don't smoke, don't eat red meat, and get a moderate amount of exercise, like an hour a day for 5 days a week. Which, guys, I don't even agree with that. I don't agree with the fact of saying don't eat red meat. I definitely think that you shouldn't smoke. But even despite that, there's people who smoke their whole life, like my grandfather, and never even got lung cancer. He actually died at 81 years of age of a medical error. And so there's a reason why that actually happens. So no one's talking about how to prevent cancer from a very high level, other than just a basic level that your doctor would say, don't smoke, don't eat a bunch of red meat, avoid the junk food, and try to get enough exercise. But the reality is you can take that 90 steps further in giving someone an awesome cancer prevention plan when it comes to testing physiology. Number two, how are they talking about how to test physiology before it can be diagnosed as cancer? This is like there are certain lab markers on a stool test, like beta-glucuronidase. When you do a Dutch test looking at the 4OH pathway, which is very mutagenic to the DNA of specific cells, looking at carcinogenic embryonic antigen, which will show if there's a lot of quickly dividing cells within a person's body. And so is anybody testing physiology before we're getting that fatal news of, I'm sorry, you have cancer, there's no hope, and there's no cure? And then number 3, is anyone talking about how to change physiology so that it doesn't come back? See, if you've had cancer, and whatever cancer it might be, and you've undergone treatment for it, and they say, yep, we got it all, we got all the cancer, if you never ever change the physiology that brought the cancer on in the first place, then guys, this is why people have a recurrence of cancer. It's just a matter of time. So what are we doing in order to test and address and change physiology so that a person can say, rather than say, I hope it doesn't come back, they're saying, I know it's not going to come back because I'm doing this, 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 and this. So no one's talking about that, but there is one group that's talking about it, and it's the wonderful doctors within the Wellness Way. So I'm going to go to Guyton and Hall's Textbook of Medical Physiology, and I like to quote that when people say, well, where'd you get that from? I got it from a medical textbook of physiology that's 950 pages long. That is actually the physiological textbook that any healing arts profession, excuse me, uses in the first 1.5 to 2 years of schooling in order to understand what's happening physiologically in the body. So Guyton Hall's Textbook of Medical Physiology does have a specific chapter about cancer, and here is what the textbook says. It says this: cancer may be caused by mutation or by some other abnormal activation of cellular genes that control cell growth and cell mitosis or cell division. So really, what is cancer? Cancer is a cell that has lost the ability to be able to either die or it begins dividing out of control. Now, I want you guys to understand this. No one dies of cancer. What they die from is when the tumors actually start suppressing certain physiological functions because they're actually causing physical pressure in different parts of the body that's compromising organ function. What they also say is this: also present in all cells, not just some cells, in all cells, are anti-oncogenes, also called tumor suppressor genes, which suppress the activation of specific oncogenes. Therefore, a loss or inactivation of anti-oncogenes can allow activation of oncogenes that lead to cancer. So you actually have a built-in mechanism within your genetic expression to control how quickly cells divide and replicate. Now, for several reasons, only a minute fraction of the cells that mutate in the body ever lead to cancer. What they go on to say is this: cells that are potentially cancerous are often destroyed by the body's immune system before they grow into cancer. Now, I want you guys to read that again. That potentially cancer cells are often destroyed by the body's what? Their immune system before they grow into a cancer. So really what you're talking about is you're talking about something that has to cause mutation of a gene, that it's involving the body's inborn ability to be able to control cellular division and cellular growth. And then number 2, ultimately what you have to have is you have to have a failure of the body's immune system. See, what a lot of people don't realize is that you can measure a person's immune system. When we were talking about COVID-19, not one doctor talked about, yeah, you can measure the strength of your body's immune system responses. And in fact, I actually just measured someone's immune system, and you could see all of his different tumor suppressing cells were low, natural killer cells were low, CD8 cells were low, CD4 cells were low, B lymphocytes were low, and all of those things are actually needed in order to be able to fight cancer every single day. Now they go on to say this: most mutated cells form abnormal proteins. Now listen to this. They form abnormal proteins within their cell bodies because of their altered genes, and these proteins activate the body's immune system, causing it to form antibodies or sensitized lymphocytes. And what sensitized lymphocytes are those? Those are called your killer T cells, your tumor suppressing cells, also known as your CD8 cells. Yet which doctors are measuring that with people to prevent cancer or people who have already had cancer? So they're saying that react against the cancerous cells, destroying them. In people, now listen to this, in people whose immune systems have been suppressed, such as heart transplantation, the probability, or taking immunosuppressant drugs after kidney or heart transplantation, the probability that a cancer will develop is multiplied as much as 5-fold. So what did they just say? They just said that even when a cell turns cancerous, it will change its membrane and it will cause it to basically have a flag on its membrane that will tell specific immune cells saying, hey, I'm cancer, I need you to get rid of me. So ultimately, cancer is a failure of a person's immune system. But in addition to that, what do they also say? Is that if you are doing something to suppress the immune system, like for example, the number of people who are taking autoimmune medications that are suppressing the immune system in the form of some kind of corticosteroid, that now your chance of having cancer goes up by as much as 5 times, which is basically going to guarantee with the number of people who have cancer in the United States, it's basically a guarantee that you're going to have cancer because you are chronically immunocompromised. So ultimately, guys, it comes down to a failure of the immune system. So here's my first question. What doctors are properly testing your immune system? Because ultimately, your backup plan is your immune system. So how many of your doctors are properly testing the immune system by looking at your helper T cells, by looking at your suppressor T cells, that are looking at your B lymphocytes, and are also looking at what's known as your natural killer cells? So specifically, the ones that are in charge of this are going to be your tumor suppressant cells, which are your CD8 cells, even your natural killer cells will play a role in it as well. So how many people, after you've undergone cancer treatment, are getting this tested every single year or every 6 months so that you can do those things to rebuild the immune system and change the physiology that brought it on? Now, I will tell you this, I've tested people after they've undergone chemotherapy, and their immune systems, and looking at this pre and post, their immune systems were actually worse. So it begs the question, if you don't change the physiology and you leave their immune system in worse shape, then are we actually creating another scenario where the cancer will come back, and this time maybe even stronger, because in some cancers there's still stem cells that still survive that become very virulent and very resistant to any kind of chemotherapy type treatment. So it really does come down to testing your immune system. We talked about this a lot when it came to understanding and being able to protect yourself from a viral infection, but this is also including cancer. That's why, guys, the immune system is so important. And the immune system is involved in the reason why you are sick, whether it's chronic inflammation, whether it's food allergies, whether it's bloating, whether it's reflux. Guys, the immune system is the first thing that you need to start to handle. Now, here's what they go on to say, because this is really fascinating. The probability of mutations can be greatly increased when a person is exposed to certain chemical, physical, or biological factors, which is really interesting, because this is what we talk about, is that the reason why a person gets sick is because of physical, chemical, and mental stressors. So here's what they say. The first one that can be caused by ionizing radiation. So it might be X-rays, gamma rays, or UV light. Now, here's the thing, guys, is that yes, the sun is ultraviolet light. No, you shouldn't go out and burn yourself every single day, but we have taken it so far to avoid the sun by slathering ourselves on something that's actually more toxic to the skin, being sunscreen, than the actual sun itself. So what's so interesting is when people say, yeah, I got skin cancer. I'm like, well, where did you get the cancer at? They're like, I got it, on my back next to my belt line. And I'm like, well, that part has never ever seen the sun, so why'd you get skin cancer? Because it's more of a reflection of a person's immune system, and it's also a reflection of toxicity, and it's a reflection of what's happening on the inside that's being expressed out through skin. Because remember, one of your detox channels is, yes, your liver and your GI system, it's your lungs, it's also your kidneys, and then it's also through your skin. I want to go over the second thing is chemical substances, okay? So certain chemicals can cause mutations. So remember, everyone's talking about genetics, but remember, there has to be something that damages the DNA, okay? So chemical substances that can cause mutation are called what? We call them carcinogens, okay? Now, one of the biggest carcinogen the doctors will talk about is the whole idea of actually smoking, okay? So when you talk about carcinogens are things that are damaging the cell's DNA. Now, you actually do have a built-in mechanism to heal and to repair your DNA. It's actually an enzyme called thiol. And what's interesting is you can do certain things in order to increase that enzyme, but there's other things that you can do to not only avoiding specific carcinogens, but the other thing too is you can do things in order to heal and to repair your body's DNA. So my second question is this: who is teaching you how to protect yourself from DNA damage and how to repair it? I want to go over with you a fascinating article, okay? National Institute of Health, Library of Medicine, also known as PubMed. This comes from the Journal of Toxicology and Pathology. And then here's actually what the title of it was. It said the effects of astragalus injection on different stages of early hepatocarcinogenesis in a two-stage hepatocarcinogenesis model using rats, okay? It's a bunch of really big words, and what they're saying is they're injecting a specific herb known as astragalus in order to look at what is happening with liver cancer, okay? Now here's what they actually said, which is absolutely fascinating, okay? They said that astragalus actually slows the telomere shortening rate by attenuating oxidative stress and increasing DNA repair ability in human fetal lung diploid fibroblast cells, okay? So what they are saying is that astragalus can actually help the DNA to repair itself. Another study that they said reported that the active ingredients of astragalus have a repairing effect on DNA damage, and that there is a close relationship between the cancerization of normal cells and DNA damage. So who's teaching you how to heal and how to repair your DNA? In addition, astragalus polysaccharide relieves oxidative damage induced by hydrogen peroxide, okay? So here's what they say. These studies suggest that astragalus inhibits DNA damage in cancer cells in vitro. Thus, astragalus and its main components not only relieve DNA damage, but it also inhibits cell proliferation of various tumor cells and induce what's known as cancer cell apoptosis, or induce death to a specific cancer cell. This is one of the reasons why I take astragalus every single day, not only to protect my DNA, but also there's other things that astragalus would do, especially in helping to repair intervertebral disc damage as well, which I had a terrible, terrible disc herniation when I was 22 years of age. So I take it every single day to prevent the discs in my spine from breaking down and dying, which then leads to disc bulges, herniations, and things like that, in addition to doing other things. So who is teaching you how to protect yourselves from this DNA damage, okay? Now, the third question I want to ask is what chemicals will we discover down the road that are causing today's cancers? So guys, what's so interesting is that when you look at people, the FDA, for example, and they say, well, this has been proven to be safe and effective, what I say is every drug that's been taken off the market by the FDA, the same organization, actually deemed it first safe and effective, and millions of people actually took it. That was creating damage to the DNA. You don't have to look very far to look at all the things that the FDA has actually taken off the market. Here's one, for example: inflammatory effects of subacute exposure of Roundup in rat liver and adipose tissue. National Library of Medicine, National Institute of Health, and this actually comes from the article Dose Response, and this comes from 2019, okay? So they actually will say that, yes, Roundup, which is your weed killer used in your yard, but you're getting way more exposure from it in agriculture because it's sprayed on corn, it's sprayed on beans, it's also sprayed on wheat, and it's used as a drying agent, and it also can be present in oats and things like that. So basically any grain that you are taking in, if it's not certified organic, can have a lot of Roundup within it. And Roundup actually does a lot of things. It will cause damage to the small intestinal barrier lining. It actually will interfere with specific liver enzyme activity, which impairs a person's ability to be able to detoxify, which basically means that Roundup is really one of the things that prevents your liver from getting rid of other carcinogens as well. So what they said from this is they said that our data, remember, the National Institute of Health, suggests the development of inflammation in lipid and hepatic organs upon exposure to Roundup. So where is it stored? In the liver and in your fat cells. Furthermore, liver histological studies showed formation of vacuoles, fibroid tissue, and glycogen depletion in the groups treated with doses of higher Roundup. These observations suggest progression of fatty liver disease in Roundup-treated adult rats. In summary, our data suggests progression of multi-organ inflammation, liver scarring, and dysfunction when it's exposed to Roundup. So isn't that amazing? You look at the number of people who have systemic inflammation and the number of people who have fatty liver, which is now, they say, 2/3 of people in the United States, which creates impaired detoxification, which will create problems with the thyroid, which will create problems with a person's ability to be able to clear estrogens, including 4-hydroxyestrone, which is very mutagenic to the breast tissue. So you can see how we're taking this further and further up the ladder to actually start asking questions so that we can start preventing it from happening in the first place. Now, one of the third reasons why someone develops cancer is because of physical irritants. So here's what they say: physical irritants can lead to cancer, such as continued abrasion of the linings of the intestinal tract by some types of food. The damage of the tissues leads to rapid mitotic replacement of the cells. The more rapid the mitosis, the greater the chance of mutation. So here's what's interesting, guys, is that if you're doing things that is causing chemical irritation, which this is a perfect example when it comes to the colon, this is also a perfect example when it comes to what's known as Barrett's esophagus, is because exposure to stomach acid, when it shouldn't have exposure to stomach acid, meaning the tissue isn't designed to be able to be exposed to it, is that it will cause the tissue to break down, become inflamed, and the body says, you know what? We should change the tissue here, because if we change the tissue, we'll be able to withstand this environment. So when people say, oh my gosh, my bad luck, I have esophageal cancer, I'm saying, thank God that you got it, because it will allow you to be able to live longer. Otherwise, what would have happened is that tissue would have broke down and you would have had a massive ulceration within that area. So they're saying that actually physical irritants, it's the body trying to adapt to a very, very terrible environment. And it's almost like if you have a blister and you keep rubbing it, pretty soon that tissue will adapt and it will turn into a callus. Now think of it, if that tissue doesn't turn into a callus and it stays a blister, the skin will continually get rubbed. You'll keep wearing away different surfaces of the skin. The layers of the skin will keep wearing away, which then ultimately you're going to get a breakdown of that barrier and you're going to get a massive infection of the hand, eventually becoming systemic. So it's the body's way of adapting to try to protect you. And then you also have hereditary tendencies, which people love to blame. Now, is there a hereditary tendency with certain types of cancers? I believe yes, that there is. I would also argue what caused that DNA to damage in mom and dad, that they're then passing on those genes. Because if you look at things that are involved with going above genetics, known as epigenetics, they'll actually say that a person's genetic expression is really dependent on the health of mom and dad at conception. So can your genes change? Yes, 100%. I believe that to be true. We put way too much emphasis on genes. And the reason why is because it just takes out all the blame on anything that we did with our life and with our lifestyle. It's the perfect way of actually telling someone. It's like saying it's not your fault, it's not your fault, it's not your fault. And I'll be honest, if it was me, I would say, tell me it's all of my fault, because I'm going to fight like mad to make sure that I can change the things that I can change. And I always tell people, if you're going to blame your genes, it's going to make you lazy. If you're going to blame your genes, it's also going to make you hopeless. And even if you said that you could improve yourself 5% by what you're doing, then it gives you a 5% chance, a greater chance of actually healing. So I always say, even if it's only 1%, then fight 100% and give yourself the best chance of actually surviving it and actually healing. Now, the reason why they talk about hereditary things is because of this. Guys, most times if there's some kind of gene alteration, is that you need a perfect storm of genetic mutations in order for cancer to continue to grow, and you need a failure of the immune system. But when they say this, it says the reason why not everyone gets cancer because it's quote-unquote hereditary or because it's genetic is because they may only have one genetic mutation, but they also then need a lifestyle that's going to cause a second and sometimes even a third that's going to lead to tumor progression. So we put way too much emphasis on any kind of hereditary tendencies. And a lot of times when people go in for cancer treatment, they say, should I change my diet? Should I be taking any vitamins? And the doctors say, no, don't ever, you don't want to feed the cancer. Well, guys, what's going to help you get over the cancer in the first place is actually giving sufficiency to the things that kill cancer, which is actually your immune system. So think of this. This is tough for people to kind of reconcile, but start thinking of it from a different perspective. Are some cancers an adaptation to help you live longer? And it's just like the idea that if you keep rubbing your hands, for example, like for me, with a barbell or with a pull-up bar, pretty soon you're going to start to develop some pretty rough hands and a lot of calluses, because if that didn't happen, then I would have a massive infection on my hands. So think about that with the colon, think about that within the esophagus, because I just talked about this, is like, look at this. If you have reflux and you're not getting to the reason why you have reflux, and the reason why you have reflux isn't because you don't have enough proton pump inhibitors or not taking enough Nexium, it's actually because of a chronic low stomach acid environment. And what happens is in that low stomach acid environment, you're not sterilizing the food, you're not breaking down your proteins. Your stomach senses this as it starts to go into the duodenum, and it will send the food back into the stomach for another mixing cycle, and this sphincter actually stays open, and it will shoot the acid into here, and then it will cause inflammation, erosions, and those cells have to adapt. And while they're trying to adapt, you can get some issues happening with some mutation of some of the DNA, but it's the body changing the type of tissue to start to protect you if you are not doing what's necessary, okay? So the question is are some cancers really an adaptation to help you live longer? And 100% I believe that that is true. That if that tissue didn't adapt into a cancer, then what would have happened is you would have died a long time ago from something else. So the tissue has to adapt in order to help you survive longer. Now here is, when you look at this, when you're looking at Dutch testing, I'll give you a perfect example. This is actually someone who underwent chemotherapy and also radiation for breast cancer. And so after the fact, it actually was even taking things like estrogen blockers or aromatase inhibitors But even despite that, and she actually should have estradiol, estrone, and estriol levels up to here, but they put her in a medically induced menopause, even in her mid-30s. So when you look at this and you see how she's metabolizing specific estrogens, you can see the unbelievably high amount of what's known as 4-hydroxyestrone, and this you can see is that she's at 24% when it should be at 7.5 to 11%. So here's a perfect example of doctors giving young people, putting them in menopause, putting them in estrogen blockers, aromatase inhibitors is what they're called, because they think that estrogen is the problem, and estrogens are not the problem. It's how they're getting metabolized. And so she needs to be pushing these over into this protective pathway. And guys, I'll give you a little hint. You actually know what can push that over into the protective pathway, and it's things like Japanese knotweed, which contains resveratrol, and doing things like I3C and a lot of compounds that are specifically found in things like broccoli, in cauliflower, in Brussels sprouts, and things like that. It's just for her, she's got to take them in extremely, extremely high amounts. Now, the last one that I want to go over is the fifth reason. There's certain types of oncoviruses or cancer-causing viruses. So human papillomavirus, or HPV, which people are probably well aware of, hepatitis B, hepatitis C virus, Epstein-Barr virus, which, guys, by the way, 90% of people actually do have Epstein-Barr virus within them. The reason why it comes out is because the immune system becomes compromised. Human immunodeficiency virus, HIV, and human T-cell leukemia virus. So is there a viral connection to certain types of cancers? Yes, there is, 100%. But again, ultimately, it's a failure of the immune system. So in the case of DNA viruses, the DNA strand of the virus can insert itself directly into one of the chromosomes, thereby causing a mutation that leads to cancer. But again, it's still a failure of the immune system. Because in order for that DNA, the virus to be able to replicate within cells, it means that the immune system is failing to take care of it. Now, in the case of, this is what's interesting, guys, RNA viruses, some of these viruses carry with them an enzyme called reverse transcriptase that causes the DNA to be transcribed from the RNA. The described DNA then inserts itself into the animal cell genome, leading to cancer. Here's what's really interesting is name something that we've been doing by inserting RNA into people's cells, and I will tell you, it is made by Johnson & Johnson, it's made by Pfizer, it's made by some of these companies, and you know exactly what I'm talking about. What's interesting is what they're talking about now is actually injecting specific RNA into a person to then change the genetic expression in order to fight cancer, in order to heal the heart, and all of these different things. And guys, I believe that it's going to be a complete and utter failure because the wisdom of the body, doctors have never replicated it. So I know for me, I am going to honor the wisdom that God put in the body, and I'm not going to be honoring the wisdom that man thinks he has in order to manipulate genetic expression. We have everything that we need is built in inside of the body, and if it isn't, figure out what has actually caused it. So I will tell you this, that cancer is a multi-system, multifactorial disease, and a lot of things have to fail before someone is diagnosed with cancer. But if you put it as simply as possible, is that the first reason is that you're doing things to cause an increase in oxidative damage of the DNA that's damaging the DNA expression. And then number two, it's due to failure of a person's immune system to be able to keep up. So this is why we say, hey, maybe we should be doing things that's not causing oxidative damage. Maybe you should then be doing some things to heal and repair the body's DNA. And then ultimately you should be getting to the reason why there's a lowered immune response. And there's a lot of different reasons why. It can be due to chronic infections. It can be due to blood sugar issues. It can be due to having nutritional deficiencies. There's always a reason why. So why don't we work on decreasing oxidative damage and then ramping the immune system up to where it is so that you have immune system sufficiency, not for 2 months, not for 3 months, but for a lifetime. And that way we are relying on the inborn protective mechanism that we were all born with in order to be able to fight cancer every single day. So hopefully, guys, that makes a lot of sense.